Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Raising the Next Gen podcast. I'm really excited about our guest today. I devoured her book as soon as it got into my hands. We met at a conference, and Meredith Miller has been so gracious to join us here on the Raising the Next Gen podcast. Welcome, Meredith.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Meredith has authored a book, first of all, Woven, but I think it's the subtitle that just thrills me more than anything. Nurturing a faith your kid doesn't have to heal from. That kind of hits home from somebody who's been working in the church for about 25 years. I see people come in with church hurt, and what you have written here is going to help prevent church hurt, I think, for a lot of families as they're just doing their best to raise their kids in a life of faith. And so it's an incredible piece of work.
I hope so. Thank you very much. I'm so glad to have had the chance to work on it. So.
Yeah, it's great. Well, can you just share a little bit about your faith story and sort of how you got into all of this work and how you've kind of dug into thinking about God and faith formation with kids and families?
Yeah, I grew up in a really lovely church, part of the American Baptist tradition, and it valued kids tremendously. It was probably the single most important, departmental space within our church community. And so I was the beneficiary of the really good thing with lots of adults who they didn't just care about kids. They also were the kind of people that I watched learn about new topics that came up in current events. I watched them change their mind on stuff. So I had this really wonderful thing modeled in a lot of ways. And then I started volunteering with kids as a high schooler. We had a lot of ways for young people to be connected with even younger people. And when I was in college, we built this staff team for family ministry for the summer. And that was kind of the beginning of them being much more formally involved with kids ministry. And that was also the time when a new curriculum was coming on the scene that everyone was just over the moon about. And I had an aversion to it kind of from the jump. But what do I know? I'm a punk 20-year-old. And ultimately I ended up being hired by my own church. We purchased that curriculum and then I would rewrite it. That was the beginning of my introduction to curriculum design. And so then you kind of play out down the road, and I went to seminary and got involved at Fuller Youth Institute, working on the research that became the Sticky Faith Project, and just kind of stayed in this space for a long time. And by the time, as you know, you get enough years and reps and students and parents kind of all in the mix, it sort of started to shape my thinking more and more about where I was seeing that research not actually lead to the responses that I thought it would lead to. Around the 2010s, we had a lot of conversations about major research themes. And then programmatically, the response was just really delayed. And that was a big part of sort of deciding to dive into that work in the last few years, was being able to kind of go direct to parent, because digital media creates more of that space to have these kinds of conversations and to share some of the research stuff that a lot of practitioners know. And all of that kind of came from there.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way for you not only to be mentored, but then to be able to lean in and get those opportunities to just keep thinking and growing and constructing and deconstructing and reconstructing kind of your faith. This book, Woven, you talk, it actually blew my mind a little bit. I grew up, kind of in a similar background in the church. We always talk about faith as a foundation, kind of as this flooring, but you offer a different perspective of faith being sort of like a web, even with your aversion to spiders. I loved that part of your story too. Can you share sort of this model of a web, what you mean by faith as a web for our friends listening?
Yeah. We do have a lot of construction language, right? We do a lot of building-based metaphors, but they reach certain limits in ways that a spider web doesn't. So when a spider weaves a web, literally, they adhere their silk to somewhere that they feel like is going to be a strong spot. And then they use this silk to go anchor point to anchor point. And those threads really give strength to their webs. And then they actually switch silk to do their internal threads. And that's what gives webs their unique texture and beauty and shape. And spider webs are famously strong. Pound for pound, silk is stronger than steel. But they're also strong because of their ability to flex when stressed, which is something a constructed building cannot offer. Right. I come from earthquake territory. I live in Southern California. And in order for our buildings to stop crumbling after some major earthquakes in the 80s, a lot of our building codes had to deal with creating more flexibility in their construction because rigidity leads to crumbling. And And spider webs are incredibly unique. That they aren't just sort of like types are similar, but like an orb weaver, which is something a lot of people are familiar with, those pretty symmetrical ones that look like circles. They look like the book. That's only 10% of all spiders that even do orb webs at all. The other 90% weave different shapes. They do funnel webs and tangle webs and hammock webs based on what species they are and what environment is their home. And so there is this uniqueness, even at an individual level. It's snowflakes. No web actually is like any other web. And when I think about how that can be an image for our faith, one thing that I find very helpful is recognizing that change, crisis, challenge, pain, these are all things that stress our faith. And I think we need mental models that expect stress and are thinking about being prepared for it. It's also an image where there's breakage. Birds fly through, sticks break them. And again, that's just, I think, way more apt than what a lot of people experience with a wall style faith, which is if you take too many bricks out of a wall because things you thought were true about God or the Bible or how we practice faith, if those things start to change too much, you have to remove them and you end up with something that feels like it has completely fallen to bits.
Yeah.
Webs expect change. They expect challenge. And the strength of a web as compared to a wall, it's found in what it's anchored to. And a lot of times with kids, when we work in building metaphors, we think the strength comes from what they've learned. Their foundation is how many Bible stories they know, how many verses they've memorized, how much church they've attended. When we think about our faith as a web, the strength comes from who God is. And it's about knowing God and being able to have the strength of, I know God's character. I can attach myself to a God who's just and compassionate and good and kind and present, and that can continue to grow. But it's a different source of strength than a lot of the ways we talk about kids having a quote unquote firm foundation in faith. So I've found the web to be incredibly helpful, despite it keeping me in the world of spiders way more than I wanted the last few years.
No, I thought the metaphor was so helpful when you think about how you raise your own family. You know, like you said, every web looks different, you know, and every parent and caregiver who are trying to, and every kid is different.
Yes.
You know, I've got 4 in my own kiddos, and they are all so different when it comes to building. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think in some ways I can look at how I parented, say, my 29-year-old. I was trying to do those Bible stories. I was trying to do some of that obedience work. And then I did watch it sort of crumble a little bit when he ended up with conflict, just from learning or from engaging people with different faiths and seeing that beauty. Yeah. And it was harder without expecting that change and that development was going to happen.
Right. Yeah. And that uniqueness element is such a big piece of it, that family to family and kid to kid, so much of what gets put out for next gen assumes one size fits all.
Yeah.
And then it's just about trying to get kids to fit that mold or families to fit that mold, get the parents and caregivers on board to fit the mold. And there's really no research to support that one size fits all sort of fit the mold thing on the one hand. And then there's just that practical thing that wouldn't we want something that accounts for our kids, our community, our culture, our context, and lets that speak into what faith looks like, versus this thing that we sort of, a lot of the resources especially, right, assume a certain thing and then just try to get everybody on board. And it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way. And I love what you talk about too, is that the anchors are more into God's character. Yeah. God is trustworthy. God is good. You know, it's basically the fruits of the Spirit kind of thing is what you're saying. What do you know, when you're thinking about parents and caregivers, when they're trying to raise a family and they're shifting their paradigm from building this kind of obedience model to more of a web model, what do you think most parents are more worried about right now as they're raising their kids in a life of faith, or they're trying to?
I think that a lot of parents and caregivers were raised in an obedience training paradigm themselves. They were expected to behave properly, and that's what made God happy. And so even if they have this gut sense that that's not what they're doing next, they don't necessarily know what that means they do. They know what they don't want more than they feel like they've got a vision for where they want to go, because along with obedience training paradigms, there's a lot of fear in its sort of assertion that it is the one size fits all, that that's really what God wants and that's really what makes God happy. Underneath that is a lot of fear of, well, if I don't subscribe to that, if I don't buy into this, what. And so having not just a vision, but a confidence that they are allowed, that they are free to figure out what it looks like for their family to follow Jesus in beautifully ordinary ways, and to have their kids in a process of getting to know God, right? If it's not an obedience training paradigm, then it's a trust-based one. But that assumes that what you're doing with your kids is giving them time and space and experiences to get to know God and sort of figure out if God can be trusted. Obedience training paradigms say, well, since God is trustworthy, then the thing I'm trying to do is teach my kid to obey God. But a kid doesn't know God's trustworthy yet. And that's what an adult gets to do, is be with them in that. And I think a lot of parents and caregivers who are now with young people themselves, they are trying to create something new, and they don't always have the privilege of being able to draw on what they were given. They're having to sort of respond as wanting to make something fresh and new and different. And that can just feel kind of scary, kind of challenging, because it's just a different thing than repeating what you had.
Yeah, I think that's kind of your whole tagline. We have so many adults who are raising kids in the church who had to heal from their faith, or still have sort of a broken faith from growing up. And they say, I want to do something different. I'm just not entirely sure where to start or how to start. So I get them baptized, send them to Sunday school. I'm just trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Can I just drop them back off with church and have them do it?
Have them do it. Yeah. Yeah. Like, because I don't know what to do. So how can we have them do it? Speaking of practically, you give a lot of real practical ways in the book. We share with parents like some practical ways that they could kind of live into this new model of faith development in the home. I love what you talk about. Like, it doesn't have to be family devotions. That's
no, right.
Oh, goodness, no. Like, that's liberating for some of us. Like, I wouldn't even know where to start,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and one way I think a parent could start is that there are really 4 kind of research supportive themes that can be very significant. One of them is about like rituals and traditions, the things that get repeated. And that can be as small and informal as like bedtime, or when you send a kid off to school, or you welcome them back like home after they've been away. Like just that like one sentence way that you sort of bless them with those words in a repeated sort of way. It can also be traditions like their birthday and Christmas and Easter, and just being able to take these times that are going to come year over year and say, okay, what does it look like to do these in ways that feel joyful and sustainable, right? A lot of times at Christmas, that might mean like doing maybe a little less or slowing down a little bit. I think at Easter, it might mean that you're kind of willing to take on some more questions and challenges because it's a more complicated story. Yeah. But those repeated things, like that would be a place to look. Another would be about relationships, that kids just do need more than their nuclear family in their faith experience. And so just thinking about adults your kid likes. It could be coaches and teachers. They could be from a faith community. They could be extended family members, but just who are other adults that your kid is really enjoys time with, and can you just broker like a couple more times on the calendar? It doesn't have to become like a weekly breakfast with their grandparent, but it could be that you go ahead and get like a quick weekend in with family in the next 6 months that you might have let slide otherwise, because you are just wanting to lean into those relationships that a young person needs, because you need more than you. And then another one that comes up a lot is just space to explore scripture. And that often becomes the devotional thing. But really, there's no need for it to be devotionals. There's no need for it to be daily. Like the schedule of how kids explore the Bible is not the important thing, just the chance to hear stories that tell the story of who God is and what God's like. And so I think being able to be creative about, does my kid like podcasts? Then we'll find it as a podcast. Yeah. Does my kid want me to tell them a story? Okay, sometimes I'll tell them a story. Is that going to be better at bedtime or in the car? Okay, so like thinking about what your kid likes, what sounds fun, and when they're really at their best to do that, and leaning into those pieces. Again, because the one size fits all, a lot of us, whether we did it or we have just heard of it, it's the dinner time devotional. Yeah. I don't know. My kids, like dinner time is never their best time. That we are bananas. Everyone's bouncing everywhere. We're rarely at a table. Even just letting that go and exchanging it for, I'm just trying to look for times to tell you the story. And maybe by the end of a month, I've told you a few. It's a very different thing than every day we've got some sort of content we have to cover.
Yeah, I think I hear a lot of times parents will come up and say, "Oh, Pastor Angie, my kid has this really hard question from this Bible story we heard. Pastor Angie, you need to answer this, kind of atonement theory or
Yes.
whatever." I feel like parents sometimes are afraid of those questions that they're afraid to not have an answer,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to the Bible.
Yeah.
What encouragement would you give parents when it comes to those big questions, those tough things?
I think it's so valuable for kids to hear that we don't know. Because then in the middle of that, you're saying, my faith doesn't depend on having certitude and every answer lined up. There is something more to this faith than the information I'm confident entirely about. And that's important to model. I think it also allows you to model with kids, how do we carry questions? How do we go looking for answers, right? That I sort of talk about like you can stall and circle back. Like you just say like, it's a great question.
I love
I
that.
need some more time. And then you circle back in a day or a week to offer an insight or to say, hey, I still don't know, but I haven't forgotten about that question. There is this process to it all. And again, welcoming questions so that then you can be in an I don't know process. Then your kid understands more and more what they do with all the questions that don't have easy answers. And that's its own faith building skill, like how to carry questions without easy answers. That helps our kids way more than we always have to find it. We always have to know it. We've got to have it locked down. So being able to create the space where your kid knows everything is askable. And where you're like, we want to nurture curiosity. We want to nurture wonder and awe and just have that be a posture about these things. Answers aren't really the key to it all. Sometimes we're going to find them and sometimes we aren't. And sometimes you're going to learn that all these people who write big old fat books disagree with each other. And so you just get to pick. And all of that is its own like faith building sort of process for kids.
Yeah, I do. I feel like sometimes parents just panic because, we were doing that foundation when we were growing up. I had to actually take a test in order to be confirmed in kind of our Lutheran tradition because it was required for me to have some level of knowledge rather than what you're saying, to have that level of questioning, of curiosity, of wonder. But what a beautiful space that God sort of dwells in that as we hold that sacred for our kids and give ourselves permission. Parents and caregivers, you have permission to hold that sacred for your families. I think that's kind of an incredible way to think about it in all of this. In thinking about like parents who feel like maybe their kid got too old or like they missed their chance. Like, all right, this would have been great knowledge if my kid was still 5, but now they're 15 and don't want to engage hardly at all about anything. Now, what do I do? What wisdom would you have for those kind of families?
I mean, it's never too late. It's just that you have to recognize who your kid is and the season that they're in, right? And part of moving into adolescence and emerging adulthood is respecting your kids' continued personhood and their own agency and their own independence. That is an important piece. And so when we're coming back to our older students to say, hey, I still think this matters. And I still think it's worth you holding on to exploring this part of what it means to be human, right? It is a human thing to wonder, is there a God and what are they like and how do we know? And even for a teenager or a young adult who's like, no, and therefore I don't care, we're going to actually carry that question for a long, long time because that's what's human. And so I think that there are ways that we have to then expect to be negotiating with our younger students that it's, hey, I still think this matters. I know you're not really into church right now. I think it'd be great if we could read something or listen to something together, and then I'll take you to breakfast and I want to hear what you think. It might mean having to say, hey, I want to hear what you think, and I promise I'm not even going to give you my opinion. I just really want to know what's on your mind. So I will only listen if you want to be the talker about what you think about some of this stuff right now. And you make up new containers that could create conversation. But you're going to have to step away from, I want you to participate or believe or value certain things to the level that I would hope for. And you're going to have to meet them wherever they actually are as the person that they are with, I think, a real posture of humility and curiosity about like, how are you thinking about this stuff right now? And I think it's going to be a lot of biting your tongue for the sake of being in better conversation with them. And again, what research says is that most of all, kids need presence and process. They need adults that are with them as they figure stuff out. And so thinking about what it looks like to offer that is more important than worrying about an outcome as the next deal.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I also wonder sometimes, you talked about having those other key adults, I think especially as young people, as those teens, or if you're feeling, that's a great place for those folks to lean in a little bit too. If there's pushback on mom or dad or step parent or whatever that looks like, to be able to kind of lean in to encourage kind of those other people to lean in.
Certainly.
I certainly experienced that with my own team. Sometimes they didn't want to hear what mom had to say, but they were really open to Uncle John, and then, and maybe in some ways Uncle John was, more open for listening when I couldn't keep my mouth shut. So
yeah,
I think
that is a big part of why extra relationships play in so heavily. I think
that is
kids just are not always going to want to talk to their parent, and that's normal.
No. Yeah, I think that's beautiful. If you were going to encourage parents about raising the next generation in faith, what would you encourage them with?
To lean in. I think that the reasons we might feel afraid makes so much sense. The concerns we hold about bad religion makes so much sense. The things we know we want to avoid are the right things to be cautious about. And doing nothing is not of service to our young people. You are choosing for them that they don't get the chance to have a process of deciding, again, is there a God and what are they like? You're actually taking that away from them in a way with your fear or your caution. And so recognizing it's true on the one hand, and then also saying, so we will create something together that gives my kid this space and honors that they need that for themselves. I think we just have to keep trying things.
I think that's beautiful. I think of a lot of folks that sit there and say, I'm just going to let my kid figure it out when they grow up. And I think that that's a hard posture to sort of, are they going to even take the time or have the time to figure out when they grow up?
And a lot of times it overlooks the fact that developmentally they're figuring it out now.
Yeah. Oh, that's true.
Right. They just are. That they're not sitting there blank with like no thoughts about this stuff. They are figuring it out. It's just a question of whether we're going to be in the conversation or not.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's really good. Meredith, I know you have another book coming out, and in March you said, and it's called Wonder, which is a little bit of what we talked about today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're diving into this next sort of season of your work?
I'd love to. So when Woven came out, one of the big pieces that resonated with people was about how we explore the Bible with kids. And it was around themes like coming to the Bible with a posture of exploration rather than looking for information or application. It was about things like coming to stories looking for who God is and what God's like rather than making a hero of the humans. And then people started saying, great, so what kids' Bible do I buy? Because I like this. And there really aren't that many options on the market that come out of this space at this point because moralistic faith is incredibly marketable. Everyone wants a good kid. And when you say you can absolutely use the Bible to raise a good kid, that is where there's been more energy up until this point. And so Wonder is a response to that. It is a collection of 52 Bible stories that have been paraphrased in kid accessible language. It's the kind of thing that if you feel like I don't know these stories, you could just read them in an animated voice verbatim. And that would be a way they could sound for a kid. But then alongside that, there are all these little footnotes with commentary notes for the grown-up that give them some of the insights into culture and context and why things are the way they are. But those have really been curated around the stuff kids often wonder about, the stuff they often ask about, and that leaves us stumped. Or they're curated around the things that an older kid who's like, I've heard this before. It's like, oh, well, then I have something new for you. And out of those footnotes will be these other insights, not to do a bunch of Bible factoids, but to bring fresh life to a story that's really familiar. So it is more of a book that you use than it is a book you just sit down and read. It's the kind that you pull off when your kid asks you a question and you're like, oh, I can go find that out. For all of us who kind of feel like it's hard to know that the Bible's complicated and then not actually know a lot about the Bible. It's like the friend that can be with an adult as they want to have those conversations.
Is an incredible gift to parents that you have created. And, I would think that a resource like that, I would love to have something like that in my own home, and to be able to just sort of ask those questions. But like you said, it's really giving in that exploratory space. We're going to think about God, and we're going to wonder about these things. Which was your favorite Bible story to work on in your new book?
I actually probably had the most fun. Oh, it's a toss-up. Okay, I will pick doing the law. We did 2 stories to try and sum up the law. And so one of them is related to like economic justice, and one of them is related to festivals and Jubilee, and being able to tell the law as a story for kids in ways that helped speak to what the community was like and how it would create a community that would work in ways that match more of who God is, and trying to make that feel more accessible. So that one was really fun. My runner-up would probably be that we did include Revelation.
You did?
Absolutely.
Good.
And so being able to do Revelation in a way that is faithful to what's happening and not fearful, and, for anyone who was traumatized by Left Behind, it might be worth it just to have a redo on that story alone.
No kidding. Well, you said that you just you redid the law and Revelation. That's incredible. Just in a way to make you're right. We avoid them as adults because it's confusing and it doesn't make sense. And so, but I do remember my teenagers at one point were like, we're going to read Revelation. And I was like, oh, hold on. we're going to need a guide for this. And, but incredible. Well, I cannot wait to get my hands on that book. I know it's going to be a blessing to so many parents, caregivers, families, grandparents, as well as churches, as churches sort of help navigate this faith formation kind of zone. Meredith, our time's kind of coming to a close today, and I'm really been grateful. But if people want to connect with you, what's the best way that they can connect with you besides just picking up your incredible work that you've done?
Thank you. So I'm on Instagram at Meredith Ann Miller, and then I am on Substack, which is meredithannmiller.substack.com. And so Substack is a monthly free newsletter on kids and faith-related kinds of things, Bible questions, faith formation research, that sort of stuff. There's also a weekly option there for people who want more. And then Instagram is just a really great way to kind of get bits and pieces of this stuff in bite-sized ways, which I always love.
Yeah, I love that too. I'm so grateful for your time today, and glad to have you here. Friends, thank you for joining us for the Raising the Next Gen podcast. I want to invite you to go check out Meredith's stuff, as well as to subscribe or consider sharing this with a friend that just says, I'm not sure how to dive into this life of faith. Share this with them, help them to be encouraged as they move forward, and they weave their faith stories together. See what I tried to do there?
I love it.
It was all right. All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Have a great day.